So tonight is about Fastboot, right? So Fastboot, the whole concept around Fastboot is server-side rendering. So right, whatever JavaScript framework you're using, React, Angular, Ember, any of the others, right? They're client-side frameworks, right? They want to create and do everything client-side, which is not very helpful for SEO purposes, right? So when you have Google or other search engines wanting to crawl your site and they come to your site, here is, let's see here. So what I did is I created a GitHub repo. You want me to make this bigger or what?
Yes, please.
Which part bigger? Oh, maybe.
Just terminal.
The terminal?
Yeah, everything.
Everything bigger?
I mean, I can see it, but I know that's small.
Oh, okay, gotcha. All right, so there is a GitHub repo that I can point you guys to earlier, or I can later. And I'm just going to kind of walk through steps of building an Ember app, but then also adding Fastboot concepts to it. So back to the initial thing here, right? I guess let's go over here real quick. Oh, you know, before I get into Fastboot, sorry, let's do some like updates, because this meetup has not met for like 10 months, and there's been a lot of changes around Ember. I don't know all of them. These are just some quick highlights that I recently learned myself, right? So we've talked about Ember 2.0 a lot, right? Yeah, that's kind of been the latest, but Ember 3 actually was just released a couple weeks ago. So I wanted to just briefly touch on Ember 3, right? So the one thing I love about Ember community, their path forward is to not break previous things, right? If you're in other worlds like React or Angular, you might have known things break when you upgrade. So Ember is all about deprecating old APIs and then eventually getting rid of them. So their big 3.0 release actually is code removal. It's not code addition. So they're removing everything that they deprecated in 2.x, right? So that's really the big thing, is they're trying to slim themselves down. Less code means faster apps. So no breaking changes, right? So as long as you've gone through the migration plan, through the deprecation upgrades, that's the link there, then from 2x to 3x, right, should be pretty painless. But one of the things you'll notice there is there's no more render and no more partial helpers. And I know for me, I have used both of those heavily in the past. Render creates its own controller, and I guess Ember doesn't like when things are creating separate controllers out of the normal workflow, so they're trying to discourage that. Partial I was a bit surprised by. Partial, I always used it to break up larger components or large blobs of HTML, right? Like put that markup in a separate file that you can reuse. Like partial is basically an include statement. So I was kind of surprised that they're getting rid of partial, but I guess be aware of that as you guys are writing code. Their suggestion there is to just whatever's a partial or whatever you're rendering becomes a component. As you'll see here, 3.0 is going to also drop support for all of the, pretty much not all of the IEs, but IE 9 and 10. And then Phantom.js, which, yeah. It is really great to see frameworks like moving forward and dropping old things. I think frameworks these days are doing a good job of getting developers and the community or users as a whole, right, staying up to date. Phantom.js, I guess, was kind of new to me. That's what Ember has used for all of its headless testing, right? When you run Ember test and it runs through all of those front-end tests, it's using Phantom.js under the hood. So that is being replaced with headless Chrome. And I don't know much more about that other than Chrome can run in a headless state now. Yeah, I don't have too much more details on that. Just other FYIs, right? 2.18 that was released, that is the last version, the 2.x series. And then for anybody, if you are, Ember 3.0 will not be published to Bower. So this is another legacy thing if you've been working with Ember for any amount of time. They started off, everything was in Bower. They used Bower to manage all the front-end dependencies, and then they slowly started moving all of their pieces over to NPM. So they got Ember over, and then they got Ember Data over, and then some things have still lingered around in Bower. But as of 3.0, no more Bower. So that is another call to just move things towards NPM. So those are I think my brief updates on Ember 3. Actually, I guess a couple more things. Ember is coming out with a status board, so kind of like I guess it's not really a Trello board, but basically you can see what they're actively working on. So this is, yeah, right, basically their ticketing system, or at least their task system that you can, maybe not their system, but something you can come through and see what they're working on. So right there, Preston, model unification. You can learn more about that here. Code splitting, I don't know if this is it or not, but you guys might be hearing a lot about, what do they call it, like tree shaking, I think was what they're calling it. And it's basically a way for Ember to go through its entire code base and figure out what you're actually using and what you're not. And it'll trim out everything you're not using, right? So it's to get rid of all the bloat or the overhead that you don't need. We run into that a lot where we want to bring in add-ons, but it might be used in one app but not another app, but we have this shared add-on, and it's just adding bloat to some of our apps. So I don't know if that's what they're calling tree splitting. I hear it as like tree shaking, where you'll go through, during build time, they'll essentially strip out anything you don't need. That I believe they're going to make an announcement at Ember Comp, which is another announcement. Ember Comp is happening every March in Portland, Oregon. It's a 2-day conference. It's a great place to find out what people are doing and meeting new Ember people. So, but yeah, I guess my rest of my updates here. Headless Chrome over Phantom.js, so check that out if you're interested. Something that was promised in 2.x that is still not a thing is routable components. So you can't just route directly to a component. Controllers are still here. And then something that I have not really kept up with is the whole Glimmer 2 engine and the Glimmer VM. Like, I have not really kept up with that, so if anybody wants to make an announcement on that, that would be great. But the new Glimmer 2 got introduced, I think, around Ember 2.10, and then I know in Ember 2.15 they upgraded the Glimmer VM again. So yeah, Preston, do you know?
In Ember 3.1, there is a feature flag that you can enable that uses template-only Glimmer templates. So
oh, really?
It's not a JS template combo, but it's just a template-only version that'll be pure Glimmer.
Interesting. Cool, cool. Okay, those are the updates. Now I can get into Fastboot while we're here tonight. So yeah, why Fastboot, or what is Fastboot, right? And as I guess I already said, it's server-side rendering. Just as an FYI, 1.0 was released only 7-ish months ago, right, or 8 months ago. So not really all that. Or I would say still relatively new. I guess a lot of work is still going on. So emberfastboot.com is where you can find more information and kind of the steps I'll be walking through. But essentially what it is it's a new node server. So instead of just having an index.html file that has your Ember.js file in it, right, and that bootstraps itself, you actually are now proxying through a node server. So there's a Node Express web server that now sits in front of your actual Ember app. And it's responsible for bootstrapping that Ember app, rendering it all on the server side, and sending back that HTML to your browser. So, yeah, we'll step through all of that here, hopefully piece by piece, if I can view source here. All right, so if you view source on an Ember app today without Fastboot, this is what it looks like. So if you're Google SEO wanting to come to your site and find out what you do, right, good luck. So you'll see here these two files that include vendor.js. That's Ember itself, Ember data and any other, well, maybe not all add-ons, but all your vendor work. My Fastboot demo.js is my actual app, the actual application code that I've written, my routes, my controllers, my models. And then from there, once this boots up, Ember takes a hold of the body element and renders everything into the DOM directly, right? So if I inspect element, all of my sources here that Ember has graciously rendered for me, and I guess that's probably still hard to see. But my source it does not reflect that state. So we want Fastboot to help us there. So I'm going to kill my Ember server here, and I'm going to just switch over to this branch here called my Fastboot welcome. Just an FYI, that app that I had up there is what you get for free out of the box with Ember. Just by saying Ember new Fastboot demo, it creates a whole framework, a whole app with routing. This one has a built-in component that is just getting rendered to the page. So, so here's how hard it is to add. Well, that's kind of a tongue-in-cheek thing. Here's how hard it is to add Fastboot to your app, right? You do an npm install of the Ember CLI Fastboot add-on. And let's make sure my slides are keeping up to date here, right? So here's the steps that I took. I did Ember new Fastboot demo. That created my app. I then installed the Fastboot add-on, and now you run Ember serve again. Yes, except I didn't do that. I switched laptops last minute, so now I'm having to install. Yeah, bad choice for tonight. Okay, so now that I have that installed, we'll start it up. So what this is going to do is, for development mode purposes, right? This doesn't help you in production. This is for development mode. It is now internally starting up an Express server and proxying kind of requests through that node server. So I come over here to my app, I reload, everything looks the same. Now my view source here, when I reload, has all of the source, right? Ta-da! So pretty cool. If you're doing Ember and it's not a complex application, then you can get this for free, right? So now the other approach to doing this is to curl this request, right? So if I curl localhost 4200, you know, this happened the other day where it didn't curl, didn't recognize it. That's interesting. We'll move forward, but curl there is supposed to be picking that up. One quick little tip here is now that you introduce server-side rendering, you're introducing a whole new set of problems essentially, and I guess that's mostly what I'll be talking about tonight. One of them is just testing or debugging, right? So now it's no longer everything loads in your browser and it starts firing off async requests, right? Those async requests are now happening on the server side that you don't get to see anymore. So one way of debugging is just to do this fastboot query string parameter up here that says turn fastboot off. So you can just say fastboot false, and it sends you back through the old route where you can do some debugging. Let's see where I'm going here before I go too far. Okay, so yeah, this concept now I have two modes. I have a server mode and I have a client mode, and you have to support both, right? It's the same app. So what this add-on does, the Fastboot add-on, is it registers a service in your app. You can inject that service into any route, controller, component, whatever, and then you get to ask yourself, am I running in Fastboot mode? Right? So here's a snippet of, hey, am I in Fastboot? If I am, then let's do something different. So you could probably quickly think, man, that's going to get really annoying to have all these conditionals all over the code, and yes, it is. So a quick notice thing here for people who are familiar with Ember, I guess I'll try to explain it. Ember has a life cycle, right? When you hit a route or a URL, it's going to go through a series of steps. There's a couple hooks here called before model, model, and after model, and these are just steps when loading a page. All of those three by default get executed in Fastboot mode, right? The other hooks don't. So like your transition hooks, wouldn't get hit necessarily. Yeah. So you really have to start thinking about your asynchronous behavior. What am I doing in each of those hooks before model and after model that might be asynchronous? One thing is, if you're not using Ember data and you're just using jQuery Ajax, it doesn't work. So some libraries rely on jQuery Ajax to do their work. jQuery Ajax relies on the XML HTTP request object that's built into your browser, right? So you don't have access to XML HTTP request from a Node server, at least to my knowledge. Call me out if I'm wrong here. So you might have to change your async library that you're using. The one that Ember recommends for all of this work is called Ember Fetch. It's like there's some protocol that they're implementing that I think GitHub put out. It's like a GitHub Fetch JS or something, and they've just wrapped it in.
They're trying to make Fetch instead of they're trying to deprecate HTTP request.
Okay. Gotcha. Great. Okay. Nice. Let me think here. If you are using Ember Data, which is Ember's built-in data API. So that's one thing I love about Ember, if you haven't used it before, is with React, you get to go pick some data API, or with any view layer, Angular included. With Ember, they come with kind of a built-in, baked-in project called Ember Data. And it can you can talk to a RESTful API, a JSON API, local storage, Firebase. Like they have a bunch of different backends that you can just kind of plug in, which is really nice. If you're using Ember Data, you don't have to do anything else. Ember Data, I guess, is already using Ember Fetch or something else, so Ember Data does the server-side request just fine. So Fastboot service is the big thing there. One thing here, or the next big thing to kind of talk about is now that you're running on the server, you probably want access or need access to things on the server like cookies or headers. Things that you didn't really have to worry about, I guess, on the server beforehand. So there is a new Fastboot, so part of the Fastboot service, right, is a request object. From there is where you can get to cookies, where you can get to headers, where you can get to, your host path protocol and all the query string parameters. So again, you're gonna, I guess, kind of picture it, right? You're gonna ask yourself, am I in Fastboot mode? Yes, okay, then use Fastboot request to get my cookie. But if I'm not in Fastboot mode, right, your app still needs to work. So there's still conditionals, right, that we're dealing with. So let me switch back over to my demo here, hopefully. So I built out, yes, this is great. Okay, let me do this once instead of a bunch of times. I'll jump to the end and install hopefully all of my dependencies. So what I did is, I built out an app that's going to talk to Heroku's API. It's going to use Ember Data, it's going to use cookies, and we're going to show, right, actually hitting a data source, what it does with that data, and how it gets rendered to the screen. So we're going to show it to you first in non-Fastboot mode, and then the steps that I had to take to get it to work with Fastboot. One of the things that I'll mention while this is installing is document, right? So you might say window.document in some of your code, or window.something, or just document.something. Can't do that on the server side. Those things don't necessarily exist. So that was the first thing that I ran into in this app, was I was trying to grab cookies and I was saying document.cookies, right? And the app just blows up, right? It can't recover, the node side can't recover from that. All right, let's try this again. We'll wait for this a little bit. So what we're going to do with this Heroku app is I'm going to authenticate. So I'm going to get a Heroku auth token, and it's just going to, I'm going to be able to list out the app servers, right, the instances that I own, and then it will also let me create instances. So let me do just a quick demo so that we see what we're talking about here. So I'll have to kill this token later, but all right, so I'm going to authorize this, and what I just did is I stuffed that in a cookie, right? So I put that in a cookie so that all my requests are looking to that cookie for that information. So I've done a GET request on all of my app servers here. I can even go into a specific instance and look at some more details. You can see I have a route up here, right? So my apps route is my all route. When I click in, that's my individual instance route. And I'm just grabbing data from Heroku's API here. Again, if I do view source, I've removed Fastboot, so nothing is here, right? New here will just let me, oh great, oh yeah, okay, that's what I need. We'll worry about that later. I can type in a new app server and it'll create it, but we'll just jump to the next step here. Actually here, let me, Let me walk through just a little bit of the code. I can make some of this bigger, but. Okay, we'll just briefly look at my apps route here real quick. So in my before model that we talked about, right, in my before model, I'm saying document.cookie. If not, I'm going to transition over to that authorize route. Otherwise, I'm going to use Ember data. So anywhere you see this .store, it's Ember data, right? And I'm going to find all of my apps. And then I have an actions handler here that's also hitting document.cookie. And then I have a destroy app for if I want to delete an app. So just to show you some of the basic items that are happening there. So we're going to check out Fastboot CLI. And again, the only thing I did there was install that add-on like I did the first time. The only difference we're going to see here is between not the add-on and now having that add-on. So if everything started up properly and it didn't, okay, that's what I wanted to see. All right, so this is where document blows up, right? So we now get to go through the process of fast booting the application. And what that means is, sorry, I should have had some of this stuff probably pulled up a little nicer. Not that one. Support Fastboot. So here we'll go through and show you some things that had to happen here to support Fastboot. One thing that I'm going to call out here real quick, which is something I learned, which is incredibly helpful for debugging, is Visual Studio Code. So I don't know what editor you guys are using. Atom can probably do it, but somehow VS Code made it really easy. So VS Code has a little debugger icon where you can run Ember CLI through VS Code. So you can see here, right, it's a Node application, and I want to launch my Ember app, and I'm just running Ember serve. So I'm running just the normal Ember serve command, but this is going to wrap like Node debugging around it. So you can actually set breakpoints, hit an endpoint, and it'll stop in VS Code, and you can step right through all of your logic in there. So I can show that to you guys later if you want. It's extremely helpful. I was going to show it here tonight, but we'll do that after I've gotten through other things. So first step, right, injecting that service. So now that I have a Fastboot service, I can inject it and start to use it. So here you can start, here's my conditional, right? Am I in Fastboot? Yep. Grab it from the Fastboot request. If I'm not in Fastboot, then let's keep using the old logic. So again, you'll see some repetition here, right? And I would say this code's probably not the cleanest. I have some duplicate logic around cookies, but it kind of shows that, yeah, that this might happen throughout a normal application. So you just see the configuration here. You can see here, right, when I want to delete a cookie. Here, I'm not doing an if else. I'm just saying, hey, if I'm not in Fastboot, then we're going to delete the cookie whenever this error happens. A couple things here. So there is some Fastboot configuration, and there's more configuration than you're seeing here. I don't actually remember what Fastboot headers does. I think it basically just tells Node like you can have access to the headers, the request headers. But the big thing here is your host whitelist. So wherever you're going to deploy your application, you need to tell Fastboot and aka probably Node Express that, hey, you're allowed to access this host. So this can be a comma-separated list of domains or a regex here, but you have to do this even before your localhost environment will let you inspect request headers. That was just something VS Code did. Oh, yeah, that's right. So I didn't even touch Ember data here. I guess that's what I was showing here. The first thing I did is I went through anything that was messing with window or document or anything client side, I took care of first. So I probably didn't need to kill that. Okay, so now I am rendering, I'm doing half and half, right? That document error is gone, my Node server is rendering the data, and my browser is getting it, getting back that HTML, where then, I guess the other concept we didn't really talk about here, did I have it on my slides? A little haphazard here. Nope, well, we'll talk about it here in a second. So now your typical client-server response. Your server sends back a whole blob of HTML that Ember previously was rendering itself. So what happens now is that Ember attaches to your body and essentially takes over all of the DOM that the server side has rendered for you. So you might notice in some apps that there is a little bit of a blip or a delay or a flicker where Ember is like reinitializing itself on top of the existing source that's there. And what you also have to worry about is that some of your lifecycle hooks will start being hit then on the client side. So it is possible for some of your hooks to be hit twice. So that can impact you if you're doing transitions or redirects. So you kind of have to be of this dual mind now of things that are happening on the server could also be happening on the client side. This is a much better demo when this source actually shows up here, so I'm kind of confused why it's not, unless Chrome's caching it or something. Oh, maybe Chrome is caching it. Okay, great.
I think you had that flag set to false.
Oh, did I really?
Chat.
Oh, awesome. That would be it then. Okay, now that I don't have the flag set to false, here's the server-side rendered DOM, right? So Fastboot rendered, and then client-side Ember comes in and reconsumes all of this stuff here. So here you can just see, this is just all basic DOM. You can see Embers, nice little Ember view classes and their Ember IDs, right? This is how Ember latches onto things and knows how to make sense of them. And then you still have your script tags down here at the bottom. Okay. So that's that. But now the next step is data, right? So I'm still retrieving data to get this list of apps. And what's happening right now, truthfully, is that it's requesting it on the server side and it's requesting it on the client side. So I'm actually asking for the data twice. So we want to stop that from happening. So the next big add-on here is called, let's talk about the concept of a shoebox. So Ember Fastboot calls this concept a shoebox. And what it does is it's how Fastboot sends data or transfers data really to the client, and that's really just through an HTML source element that's hidden. So we did this at Octave, and probably other people, it's kind of a common pattern. If you need data from your server into your index file, you'll just make like a JSON object and stuff it into the source that your Ember app can then grab, right? Grab something out of a meta tag. Ember does that already with some of the configuration. So the shoebox is that exact concept here. Now the shoebox you get right off the bat with Fastboot. You can say fastboot.shoebox, and you can manage the shoebox yourself, and I don't think I have that code anymore. I was going to show you what it's like to manage it yourself. Don't. Is the short answer. So you can say, hey, am I in Fastboot? Yes, get all my Ember data, shove it into the shoebox, and then, hey, am I client-side mode? Yep, pull it out of the shoebox. So you can do all of the puts and gets out of the shoebox yourself, but I would say it's a headache. So there's this really great add-on called Ember Cached Shoe. And it's really quite an elegant add-on. It's probably all of 20 lines of code. But what it does is it keeps an internal cache of your AJAX requests. So things that are coming through like fetch, it will keep track of it in a cache, and then when it comes and grabs it again from the client side, it deletes it out of that cache. So cached shoe is just an adapter mix-in. So I guess, some of you guys aren't familiar with Ember. Ember data has this whole concept of adapters and serializers of how you talk to your backend. So an adapter in this case would be like a JSON API or just a basic REST API. So these adapters by default know how to talk to their respective backend, and so you hook into that adapter's workflow to perform this caching. Let's see if I can show this app. And it really is, I think, all of like a couple lines. So it literally was include the mixin, add the add-on. So now when I do this and I refresh my app page here, so here's the new concept here, and I guess I'll try to make this bigger if I can. So here you see it. So it's a script tag, so I might have misspoken there. So it's a script tag of type Fastboot shoebox. It has this very unique ID, and then you can see inside of here it's just serialized JSON. So this is just an array of hashes. This is the data that came back from Heroku that gets serialized. So the cached shoe puts it into the shoebox. When my Ember app loads, it then, the client side is pulling it out of the shoebox and putting it into Ember data. So everybody's probably familiar with the Ember data extension, the Ember extension where I can go look at data, right? So you have a whole client side model of the data that you're representing here. So here are my models that were, and the concept of the term that Ember uses here and probably others is hydration, right? So it rehydrates my Ember models essentially. So it takes the source JSON, rehydrates them into actual Ember models that I can deal with. So that is something that can be very tricky if you are trying to do it yourself. If you're pushing and pulling out of the shoebox, you might actually have to push payload or push into the store yourself. You don't have to do that with Ember Cache Shoe. It's going to push that stuff right into the store for you, which is really great. So I think right now Ember Cache Shoe, I think they only support JSON API and RESTful API adapters. So if you are doing something like Firebase, I don't think Ember Cache Shoe will help you. I don't think so, maybe, but so I guess be aware of that. I think these are just for certain adapters right now. And then let me jump back to the source here real quick, just to stare at this again, right? So this is the shoebox. It has an ID. The other thing here is you can create your own shoebox if you want. So we actually do this at Outdoorsy with some translation information. So we have a translation shoebox where we stuff some translation data. So we leave Ember Cache Shoe alone and let it manage its data, and then we can do our own shoebox with whatever other data we want to pass back. So yeah, that is the shoebox. So testing. Testing is a little bit different now because just running Ember test doesn't cut it. Ember test is going to run through its normal non-express, right, non-node server-side rendered stuff. So there's an add-on for that, right? Everything in Ember, there's an add-on for that, which is great. So to enable Fastboot tests, you install the Fastboot test add-on. And to run tests, instead of running Ember test like you normally would, you run Ember Fastboot test. So let's grab Fastboot test here. See if we can see what this does here. So, it might not be the best thing to look at. So here's what a test looks like. It uses Mocha under the cover. So if you guys have used Mocha or Chai before, this is what it's written in. It's a little odd because Ember's default unit test framework is to use QUnit, so it's a little weird, like your QUnit tests will probably already exist, and then when you go to add Ember Fastboot tests, it uses Mocha, so kind of a weird switch there, but you can see here it has kind of the acceptance test logic here of I'm visiting a certain URL, and then when that finishes loading, I want to inspect the source, right? So we're using jQuery here to look at elements and make sure that things are in the source. So we have had a couple instances as Fastboot has evolved where Fastboot stops working, and we didn't have some of these Fastboot tests, so we had a couple days where we weren't rendering source. The app still works just fine, but if you really want Google and others to see your source, you need to make sure Fastboot's working. So this is what it generates for you just right out of the box. It just says, hey, do you have a body element? You can then generate your own test. I generated one for the app's endpoint. so that I can look at that app's endpoint and make sure that it's a successful response. And then what I can even do here is I can tell it to not follow redirects. I briefly showed if you didn't have a cookie, we redirected you to the authorized endpoint. So this is testing that behavior here. So do I get, and this is, I guess this is the point to remember, this is a server-side redirect. So this isn't a client-side redirect, this is a server-side, and what Ember uses is a 307. So you guys might all be used to 301s and 302s for redirects. Ember uses a 307. So this is me testing that that server-side node actually responded to my browser with a 307 redirect with a specific location, right? So keep that in mind. Like when you transition to or replace with those two functions in Ember for doing transitions, when you're in Fastboot mode, it actually sends a redirect. This is really important for us for SEO purposes as well, as we want to get rid of certain URLs, or we want to have other URLs be our primary one. We want our Ember Fastboot to issue that 307 or whichever 30 whatever you want. Yeah. Has anybody heard of 307 redirect before? Yeah, I had never either. I thought they were like making something up on their own. I actually just read about it the other day to figure it out. There's 307 and there's even another one like 306 or 5 or something. Apparently 301 and 302 browsers will try to replay the request. So if I let's say I do if I do a post request and get redirected or something like that, or maybe it's a GET request and get redirected. Apparently browsers are known to retry that location with a different method. So instead of doing GET, it might do a post, or instead of doing a post, it might do a GET. So apparently that's a thing with browsers where they'll try different HTTP verbs against that URL. The 307 is supposed to be a strict notice to the browser, don't use any other verbs, right? Like if you used a GET against this, you're not supposed to use anything else. So it's supposed to be a stricter form of redirect that says, don't retry something I might not support. So we do something funky because I'm not sure really how well this is handled. We have an Nginx server that sits in front of our Fastboot server, and we actually transfer those 307s to 302s with Nginx. So ultimately the browser's getting a 302, but Ember's default is a 307. Not that it's probably not even worth running those things. I was going to say you can just run Ember Fastboot tests to see those run, but probably not real exciting to watch tests run. Okay, now we actually get to the app server side of it. So when you go to deploy this into a production environment, you need an app server or a node server that's running your app. So there's an add-on for that. So actually, I should take that back. It's not an add-on per se as an Ember add-on because this is a separate application. So there is just an npm or a node package to set this up for us. I think it's wrong. We'll open this up. So this project here has a single server.js. The package JSON is pretty small. It has an app server, and then we'll talk about these other two guys here in a second. I think I'm on a different branch, but so here's my Express server, my node server that's going to run. So you can see here it's a Fastboot app server instance, which is really just wrapping Express, and I think there's a couple other options you can use maybe. But then you point it to the directory where your Ember app lives, right? So when you do an Ember build or an Ember deploy, you usually get an index file, JavaScript file, CSS files, all your images, right? And that goes into a dist folder. So that's what you see here. I'm actually just pointing over to the dist folder of my Fastboot demo app, right? Just locally right now. There's a couple settings you can put up here, as you can see, for like ports or global variables if you want them. So let's just start up this node server. So I think I can just say, I can either say node server.js, or I think in my package.json I have my start is just node server.js, right? So I'm just running a node app now. here's the part I want to point out here. So it kicks off multiple processes, and what you see here is it's actually booting your Ember app multiple times. So it can serve multiple or different requests. But so I no longer need my Ember app running anymore, right? So it's shut off right now, so I don't have to kill it. But so Ember's no longer running. It is now Node running for me. It switches ports on you. So if I switch over to port 4000 and hit this, right? So now I am hitting the Node server that is bootstrapping Ember on the server side and responding back with the Fastbooter server side rendered down. So kind of, as easy as that, getting a Node server up and running. So what do you do now about, let's make sure we're on track here. Actually, yeah, let's talk about these real quick for deployment purposes, right? So you have your app server, you need that by default. And then here are the other add-ons, and this is just more of an FYI, we're not going to go through all of these, but here are the add-ons that you can do. So a file system watcher, or really watch, they kind of do the same thing. As I'm developing and I'm changing files or I'm rebuilding, I can use a file system watcher and have my Node server restart, like always hot reload essentially, or live reload. So those are helpful for local development local stuff, maybe even depending on your server setup, you can use those in production. We at Outdoorsy use the S3 one, so when we deploy our Ember app, we push it up to S3. And then there's also an Ember Fastboot deployer, because Fastboot deploys its apps its files a little bit differently. It zips it all up. And then you can do some neat things with the S3 notifier and the S3 downloader. So I can have my static file sitting on S3, and I can have my Node server running somewhere else, like on a DigitalOcean server. And what we want is every time we do a deploy, we're just pushing to S3. We don't want to touch really our Node server. We would like not to. So what you can do is on that Node server is you can set up an S3 notifier and an S3 downloader. And I guess we'll look at those just briefly to kind of give an idea of what more of a production scenario. You would set up an S3 notifier with your whatever bucket you're pushing to, right, in whatever region. So you configure S3 where you're pushing your Ember apps to. And then with the S3 downloader, you also do the same thing. You configure where things are going to. And what happens is the S3 notifier is polling S3. So it's polling a specific file on S3 to see if it's been changed. Once that file is changed, it notifies the downloader, and the downloader goes out and downloads that latest zip file that Ember deploy pushed up. So this is what we use at Outdoorsy. We do the whole notifier downloader thing. So as you're changing versions, yeah, the Node server just kind of updates itself essentially. This is, I guess maybe I had this a little out of order. This is the deployment one. So with Ember, if you guys aren't familiar, there's a whole concept of a deployment pipeline. Another thing I love about Ember is that you can deploy your app almost anywhere. You want it on S3, you want it on a file system, you want it in Redis, you want it, kind of anywhere. FTP it somewhere, like people have add-ons for that. So for this, if you want to do an Ember Fastboot deploy to S3, this is the add-on that you would use. And I think that's it from a slide perspective. Do you guys have any questions? I guess about what we discussed. Everything makes sense or no? Fastboot has not been amazing, I would say, right? It has its problems. There are things that it hasn't been bulletproof, I guess I should say that, right? Sometimes I expect to just pick things up and they're bulletproof. This has not been super bulletproof. It is getting much better. Once we got that Ember cache, that was a big difference. One of the things we've noticed is Fastboot running out of memory. So as it's rendering all this server-side HTML, somewhere in there is a memory leak, and it will just eat up a bunch of memory until Fastboot essentially crashes and burns. Or I guess the Node server crashes and burns because of Fastboot. So that has probably been our biggest issue, is really just keeping the Fastboot server up for a long period of time, I should say. But yeah, I guess otherwise it's been pretty neat. The other thing, I guess, yeah, I'll just step back to real quick, was that VS Code thing. So don't know what editors you're using, but there is a way to debug Ember maybe better than you have been. So you can start, or at least, maybe not normal Ember. Ember is probably great by itself with the browser, but for Fastboot, you would definitely want to learn how to debug the server side of things and walk through that, which is really nice.
Prove it.
I think that's it.
Prove it.
What's that?
Prove it.
Prove it? Okay. Thank you, Clayton. That's actually why I committed that file, so that I could do it if we needed to. Okay. So all right, so here's your VS Code. So this is VS Code for anybody who hasn't used it before. Let's see if I can make it bigger. Yeah, you can. You have a nice little debugger thing here. These are your testing or debugging profiles. So if you click on this edit gear here, you build your profiles through JSON here. Like I said, both of these are just doing a node launch type request, but it's just running the actual server or the tests. And I don't have it started already, right? So that's Fastboot, or sorry, that's the Node server, so that shouldn't bother me. So I'm just going to click play. So you can see kind of what it's doing over here. This is the full command where it runs node, and then it uses this debug break syntax, or I guess command. I'm not entirely familiar with it. Actually, let me make sure I even have a breakpoint set up. One thing I have found is that it's setting and removing breakpoints don't always get picked up, because I think it often compiles it and you're running against kind of the compiled version. So sometimes when you set a breakpoint, and all you have to do is this, it doesn't always pick it up. No, okay. I'm going to restart. Hey, come on. Clayton, you're going to make me look bad here. That's just what I wanted. I thought that's all you had to do. I shouldn't be hitting there. Let's see. Just put in some more breakpoints. This is not hitting it. I don't think so, no, because that's it's not a client-side debug anymore. I mean, I can try it, but I don't believe that does anything. That is really strange.
So bringing up debugging editor, is that what it's supposed to be?
Yes. So yeah, what should happen is as soon as you hit this route, it should pop up VS Code, and it should put you at this breakpoint right here with your step blocks here, or your Just curiosity, I'm going to shut down this. Oops. All right, I guess I lied. This has worked for me before, so I'm not sure what is different here.
Aren't you on a different computer?
I am on a different computer. I mean, what's that?
Get the idea.
Yeah, I am on a different computer, but my other one won't behave here, I don't think. So. Yeah, okay. It's supposed to work. And it's very nice when it does. Oh, all right. Any other questions that I can answer, maybe?
So you're mainly using the Fastboot stuff for browser crawling. Do you notice any like initial render? Is that better with it, or like faster, or do you notice anything? Initial
render of the app?
Yeah.
Yes, I would say yes. You do notice the initial render is faster.
Yeah.
Yes, but as I was saying, you can also notice sometimes the flicker between the initial render and Ember retaking control. So there can be a little bit of a flicker. I guess some tips maybe is if you're using a Fastboot Ember application that you have to authenticate to get to, don't worry about Fastboot. It's not going to do you any good, really. So it is really largely for server-side rendering, right? You might get a quicker initial page load, right? Like initially, which is what you want for probably search pages or home pages or somebody that's going, high traffic pages that you want people to get to quickly, or that you want Google to crawl. If you're asking for a username and password and the only source that really an unauthenticated person sees is like the login form, probably not worth it. So we even do some extra caching measures around that. So I was telling Preston we use Nginx to proxy over to our app.node server, but then we actually have Varnish in between as well. So Varnish is doing HTTP caching. So most of the time we hit our site, we're actually spitting back HTML out of Varnish. And then Ember is taking over on the client side. So really we're only hitting Fastboot if we're clearing things out of cache or if something's been evicted. So we even try not to hit Fastboot. And have other things respond for us. So if you're interested, whoa baby. So this is the Outdoorsy website. This is all Fastboot. So this is an Ember app, 2.17 I think. So this homepage, is fed through here. Any of your content pages, your searches. This is all Fastboot. I guess, even some of the image loading you can see a little bit, right, once the app is loaded, I'm no longer Fastboot, I guess I should say, right? So since I started on my home page, all of my transitions here are not Fastboot, right? Because Ember is taking control on the client side. So it's really for more of your deep linking things, right? Like as this opens up in a new tab, that's a Fastboot render. I guess if you're actually hitting Fastboot, but so this is all content, right, that Google and other search engines can crawl now that they couldn't before. So that's it. That's good. All right.